How is it going, everybody, and welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name is Bernie. Today we have an extra special episode. I'm joined here with Adamo, also known as the Insider Man on our channel. Today we're going to be breaking down the Leafs, sort of what we saw from this past season, which had a disappointing ending, of course, but then also the biggest offseason priorities, because there's some big changes I think that need to happen for the Leafs this offseason. So Adamo, how's it going?
Not too bad. I actually just recorded a podcast for myself on the Leafs, so I'm kind of warmed up. I got some thoughts in my mind, so I'm ready to tackle this.
Perfect. So let's dive right into it. I mean, the biggest question has to be with the core of the Leafs. You look at your Nylanders, your Matthews, your Marners, who had really solid regular seasons, but it just seems every time they reach the playoffs, they're just not at the same level. And what's really interesting to me about this is it's really similar to another Toronto team with the Raptors, who had a similar issue with Lowry, DeRozan, who just couldn't get it done in the playoffs. But in your opinion, moving forward in the offseason, what do you sort of do with your core? Do you keep them intact? Do you trade some guys? What are you doing?
So I like the comparison that you made to the Toronto Raptors, because in 2018, I believe it was, the Raptors, they go out in the second round after becoming the 1 seed. They get swept by LeBron. And then I think mid-July, they trade DeMar DeRozan away, who's this lovable guy, does so much for the community. And they get Kawhi Leonard. And they go on and they win a championship. So I think you have kind of two options here for that DeMar DeRozan type of player. It's Morgan Riley on the defense. He's been here since 2012, the longest tenured Leaf on the team. He's loved by everyone. He's a leader, but he has 1 year left on his contract, so there's the ability for him to walk in free agency. Or there's Mitch Marner, who has, I believe, 4 years left on his contract, making $10.893 million per year. Toronto boy, but in his last 18 games, hasn't been able to get it done, going goalless with only 10 points. And he is a guy that I personally would move. I would move Marner over Riley. I'd try to re-sign Riley because this defense is weak without him. So Marner's definitely a guy that should be moved here.
What about Auston Matthews? I know a lot of Leafs fans would be hesitant about moving a guy of that caliber. But I mean, again, he's a guy who wasn't exactly at the same level as he was in the regular season, in the playoffs. But to some of the lack of production from him, like, is some of that blamed on not having JT there to play alongside him?
I'm sure there's some blame there that is very fair, because obviously the Leafs lost their captain. They also lost Jake Muzzin for Game 7, who is arguably their most sound defensive defenseman. So losing both of them is pretty big. But as for Matthews, I consider him completely untouchable unless you're getting the guy on my right over here, Connor McDavid or Nathan McKinnon. I think those are the only two guys that you trade Auston Matthews for. He's a generational goal scorer. We saw him score 41 goals in 54 games this season. So I wouldn't move him, but he definitely needs to be better coming in next season.
Switching away from the players, going to the coaching staff now. Sheldon Keefe is a guy who had a pretty successful first full regular season in the NHL as a coach for the Maple Leafs. But, I mean, for 2 straight years now, sort of being shaky in the playoffs. Is Sheldon Keefe a guy who's got to be worried about his job coming into the offseason?
I wouldn't say 2 yet. I think more so this is on the assistant coaches. I know we don't normally like to put blame on assistant coaches, but one of the biggest downfalls of the Maple Leaf season was their power play, who is controlled by Manny Malhotra. He is their assistant coach. And they went from like 40% in January, which was obviously unsustainable, but then completely down. There was a point where they went, I think, 3 for 62 on their power play, which is unacceptable when you have guys like Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares. You know them all. It's a stacked power play, so I wouldn't really say Sheldon Keefe is on the hot seat just yet, especially since he's been with Kyle Dubas. Not many know he's coached in, I believe, Sault Ste. Marie when Kyle Dubas was the GM of the OHL team there. And then once Dubas took over the Marlies, the AHL team, they won a championship together. Sheldon Keefe, head coach, and then here they are in the NHL, and they really have a good bond. So I don't think his job is on the hot seat just yet, but I wouldn't be content if I was him.
It's interesting that you mentioned the front office because that's also something that I was going to ask. I'm not too involved with the Leafs, but I've heard a lot of talk about what Dubas and Shanahan haven't necessarily done for the Leafs. What about some movements around in the front office?
In terms of movements around in the front office, I think everyone so far should. I think they should all be safe. We'll start with the assistant GM, Brandon Pridham. He is actually the guy who signed off on the CBA. Not many people know, so he is the reason that the Leafs were making all these cap moves. They know how to deal with the salary cap really well, so his job is safe. As for Brendan Shanahan, his job is more kind of reporting to MLSE and ownership, so I think he should be safe. As for Kyle Dubas, he's done everything in his power to make this a good team. I think obviously he had a few mistakes. One being he had the ability to go get Taylor Hall, and he passed up on that for Nick Foligno. So I think going forward, Dubas needs to stick to himself and kind of go for the better players and not worry about filling in as many holes when you're in a sport where you want to increase your chance of scoring so much because it's not a high scoring sport. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So keeping in line sort of with the front office, they're obviously going to have some big decisions come this offseason, particularly with the unrestricted free agents that the Leafs have coming into the next season and into the offseason. So I'm just going to name off some players. You tell me, are they a priority to sign? Do you want them back or somewhere in the middle or don't want them back? So the first guy is Zach Hyman.
So actually, I saw reports come out today that Zach Hyman wanted north of $6 million, which is way too much. But I think he should be their priority this offseason. He's their best unrestricted free agent. So he also plays on that left wing with Marner and Matthews. So I would definitely make him a priority to resign.
Next guy is Wayne Simmons.
This is an interesting one. I said earlier today on my own podcast that I wouldn't bring him back at 1.5 million, but 800 grand to play on the fourth line. If Wayne Simmons wants to do it, we'll do it, but I wouldn't give him more than 1.5.
All right, the third guy, Nick Foligno.
If we can, yes, I'd bring him back at a very reasonable price. I'd say no more than $2 million. But I have a feeling he's on his way back to Columbus, so I guess not.
All right, number 4, Alex Galchenyuk.
Another interesting one. He kind of revived his career here in Toronto, but again, a guy I wouldn't bring back for much money. He's very replaceable. He can only play in the top 6 is what we've noticed. So a guy like that comes anywhere, but he was a good spark for us in the playoffs.
All right, we've covered 5 and a 9, halfway there. Jason Spezza.
Easiest bring back ever. I think he's not going anywhere. He's coming back.
How about the old man, Joe Thornton?
It was awesome seeing him in a Leaf jersey. Obviously, this is a guy who is top 10 all-time in NHL point scoring, but I think we saw Joe Thornton's last NHL game. He just doesn't look like an NHL player anymore. Like he's gotten to the point where, he was never fast, but my God, it's a pain watching him out there sometimes. So, no.
Just throwing it out there. I was at the game where he got his beard ripped out. Next guy though, Zach Bogosian.
Yeah, why not? He was awesome. I think another 1 year, $1 million deal for Zach Bogosian. He was pretty good in the playoffs, especially when in I believe it was Game 5 when they sat Rasmus Sandin for a whole third period. So he was kind of stuck playing with different partners. I'd definitely bring him back.
All right, we got 2 more. Marinson is next up.
For the love of God, please don't. Please don't, Leafs. I know fun fact, I don't think he played a single game for the Leafs this season, yet he is their second longest tenured player in their organization. So I hope not, but he's a meme.
I know the Leafs figured out some stuff a little bit with their goalie and Campbell this year, but how about Freddie Anderson?
Again, I think he's going to the team behind me. Where is it? Right behind me. I think he's going to Edmonton. And I wouldn't, because I think they'll give him like $4 million. And unfortunately, the Leafs don't have $4 million to spend on their backup goalie. So I wouldn't bring him back.
All right, so let's go back some of the issues that the Leafs had with the roster. I think it's pretty safe to say, you got Morgan Riley, you got Muzzin on the team, a couple other okay D-men. But overall, I think it's pretty safe to say that's one of, if not the biggest weaknesses for the Leafs. So Adamo, if you're the GM starting tomorrow, sort of what's your plan for the defense going forward?
So I would definitely call it their biggest weakness, but I wouldn't call it a weakness. They were still pretty good defensively, but you could always get better, especially because Morgan Rielly is on his way out the door pretty soon. One thing that I would look at, and it's a fantasy scenario, but I would trade Morgan Rielly to maybe Vancouver, and you get that $5 million cap hit back. You have the $5 million cap hit from Frederik Andersen, so I would end up going for probably Dougie Hamilton from the Carolina Hurricanes. Hopefully sign him for like $9 or $10 million. I think he's the best defenseman in the NHL. He's from Ontario as well, so I think he'd be willing to come here. And I think it'd really strengthen this team's defense.
The Leafs, at a point in the season, it looked like they did pretty good in terms of what I would call their bargain shopping, getting sort of those like lower paid guys to fill out the team, Thornton, Simmons. But then it sort of fell out in the later part of the season. There's also, because they're not signing all of the free agents that they have, there's some guys that you probably need to target and fill in for the roster. Is there anybody that you sort of look at around the league maybe that could be sort of a bargain free agency guy, or even a guy you could get in a trade?
Yeah, so there's a few guys that I was looking at. I think this team could use a little bit more depth scoring, especially if the stars aren't going to show up. One guy in free agency, if Zach Hyman doesn't come back, I'd look at Blake Coleman from the Tampa Bay Lightning. He's a 20-goal guy. I'd say he's a top 5 penalty killer in the entire league. He's coming off a 3-year, $1.8 million contract, so he's due for a pay raise. And with Tampa being well over the salary cap, I think he's as good as gone from the Lightning. And the Leafs should definitely try to offer him another guy, maybe in a trade. That I don't know if Calgary would be willing to give him up. I think Toronto would have to overpay. But for Andrew Mangiapane is a solid analytical player. He could once again kill penalties. He could play on that second line left wing. He'll score you some goals. He's also from Barrie, Ontario, which is just about an hour and a half north of Toronto. So I think he'd be a guy that fitted nicely here.
Awesome. So last question, and I don't know how much of an impact this really has on the Leafs, but it's always interesting when you talk about the NHL draft and the Leafs because they haven't been super, super great at it in the past. Especially now, I think the Leafs probably could have used some of these younger guys that they could have drafted in previous years. But, looking into this year, what are you looking for the Leafs to do in the draft? It's got to be a D-man, right?
So the Leafs actually don't have their first-round pick. They got rid of it for Nick Foligno, so I don't think they're going to be making any crazy moves to trade up anytime soon. I think since this management group has come in, they've been okay at drafting. They got, obviously, Nick Robertson in the second round. Rodion Amirov last year at the first-round pick was pretty good. But I think at the draft, I forget if they're stuck with the third-round pick, but I definitely go defensemen because their defensive prospects are significantly weaker than their offensive ones. So I'd try to get another puck mover. He doesn't necessarily have to be this big, tall guy. He just needs to be a guy that's able to move the puck. And hopefully those skills are transferable to the NHL.
All right. Well, Adamo, thank you for joining us today. Guys, if you did enjoy what you saw today, make sure to let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know that you like Adamo's insight. And just give us all the comments and sort of your thoughts on everything that me and Adamo talked about today. But if you guys did enjoy the video, make sure to pound that thumbs up button. Subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs if maybe you want to see us cover even more NHL in the future. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you guys again next time.